My name is Lena. I'm sitting here now, 3 years after everything happened, trying to find the right words to tell you this story. My therapist says writing it down might help. My best friend Sarah says I need to let it all out. My daughter Emily just holds my hand and says, "Mom, tell me about Grandpa again." So here I am. This story isn't easy for me to share. Every word feels like I'm peeling back a layer of scar tissue that never quite healed right. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some stories aren't meant to stay buried forever, no matter how much they hurt. It all started, or maybe it all ended, on a Thursday in October. My father died on a Thursday. I remember that detail because Thursdays were always his day. Thursday nights, he'd come home from the hardware store he'd run for 37 years, kick off his boots by the back door, and sit in his recliner with a beer and the evening news. That was Dad. Predictable. Steady. Or at least, that's what I thought. The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I was making coffee in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, about 3 hours north of the small town where I grew up. The October rain was doing its usual thing, drumming against the windows like it was trying to get inside. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw my brother David's name flash across the screen. I knew before I answered. You know how sometimes you just know? Your body knows before your brain catches up? Lena. David's voice was flat, empty. Dad's gone. The coffee pot gurgled behind me. The rain kept falling. The world kept spinning like nothing had happened, like my father, Thomas James Carter, 68 years old, stubborn as hell and twice as proud, hadn't just stopped existing. What happened? I heard myself ask. Heart attack. Mom found him this morning in the garage. He was working on that old Chevy. Just collapsed. Of course he was working on that damn truck. Dad never could sit still. Even in his final moments, he was probably muttering about a carburetor or complaining about parts they don't make anymore. I'll be there in 3 hours, I said. Lena. 3 hours, David. I'm leaving now. I hung up and stood there in my kitchen, still holding my empty coffee mug. The rain got louder. Or maybe that was just my heart pounding in my ears. My father was dead. And I didn't know how to feel about it. The drive down to Stillwater, Oregon was a blur of gray highway and grayer thoughts. Stillwater. Population 4,200. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody's business, where the same families have lived for generations, where the biggest excitement is Friday night high school football and the annual 4th of July parade. I'd left Stillwater at 18, packed up my car the day after graduation and drove north to Portland without looking back. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of building a life away from that town, away from the whispers, away from the weight of being Thomas Carter's daughter. Don't get me wrong, I came back for holidays, for Mom's birthday, for the obligatory visits. But I never stayed long. There was always something uncomfortable about being home, like wearing a sweater that's just slightly too tight. And Dad, well, Dad and I had what you might call a complicated relationship. He wasn't a bad father. He provided for us, kept a roof over our heads, never missed a parent-teacher conference. But there was always this distance between us, this wall I could never quite climb over. He was there, but not really there. Present in body, absent in everything that mattered. The last few years had been especially strange. Mom had stopped talking about him in our phone calls. When I'd ask how he was doing, she'd change the subject. When I'd visit, he'd be in the garage or out at the store, always just missing him. And the few times we were in the same room, the silence between my parents was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Something had broken between them. Something neither of them would explain. As I drove through the familiar streets of Stillwater, past the old diner where I'd had my first job, past the high school where I'd spent 4 years counting down the days until I could leave, I felt that old tightness in my chest. The weight of history. The burden of being the oldest child, the responsible one, the one everyone looked to when things fell apart. David was only 2 years younger than me, but he'd always been the baby. Charming, easygoing, the one who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. And me? I was the serious one. The one who asked too many questions. The one who reminded Dad too much of himself, which I think he hated. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home just after 10 a.m. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens. The places that loom so large in your memory shrink down to normal size when you see them with adult eyes. It was a modest ranch-style house, pale blue with white trim, with Mom's flower garden out front and Dad's workshop around back. The lawn needed mowing. The gutters needed cleaning. The whole place had a tired, neglected look, like it had been slowly giving up. David's truck was already there, parked at an angle like he'd arrived in a hurry. I sat in my car for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, trying to prepare myself for whatever was waiting inside. Mom would be devastated. David would be trying to hold it together. And I would be expected to be the strong one, the one who made the arrangements, who called the relatives, who kept everything moving forward. That's how it had always been. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. Mom stood there, looking about 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her 3 months ago. Her eyes were red and swollen, her gray hair uncombed, still in her bathrobe at 10 in the morning. Eileen Carter had always been put together, always proper, always concerned with what the neighbors might think. Seeing her like this, broken, raw, was more shocking than the news of Dad's death. Lena. Her voice cracked on my name. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. She felt small and fragile, like she might shatter if I held on too tight. I'm so sorry, Mom. She didn't say anything, just held on to me and shook with silent sobs. David appeared behind her, looking haggard. He'd driven down from Seattle, another 3-hour trip. His eyes met mine over Mom's shoulder, and I saw my own confusion reflected back at me. We'd lost our father, but neither of us seemed to know quite how to grieve for him. How do you mourn someone you never really knew? The next few days passed in that strange, suspended way that time moves after a death. There were arrangements to make. The funeral home, the obituary, the service. Mom was in no shape to handle any of it, so David and I took over. We sat at the kitchen table with notepads and phone numbers, dividing up tasks like we were planning a wedding instead of a funeral. I'll call Pastor Mike about the service, David said, checking something off his list. I'll handle the obituary and the flowers, I added. We worked in efficient silence, 2 people who'd grown up in the same house but had become strangers to each other. David had his life in Seattle, a good job in tech, a girlfriend he'd been with for 2 years but never seemed quite ready to propose to. I had my life in Portland, my job as a grant writer for a nonprofit, my divorce 2 years behind me, my daughter Emily who lived with my ex-husband most of the time. We'd both escaped Stillwater, but in different ways. Mom drifted around the house like a ghost. She'd start doing something, folding laundry, washing dishes, and then just stop mid-motion, staring at nothing. I'd find her standing in the garage where Dad had died, just looking at that stupid Chevy truck he'd been restoring for the past 5 years. Mom, I'd say gently. Come inside. She'd look at me like she didn't recognize me for a moment, then nod and follow me back in. The funeral was scheduled for Monday. That gave us 4 days to prepare, 4 days of being back in this house with all its ghosts and secrets. On Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my old bedroom, which Mom had converted into a guest room years ago, erasing most traces of my teenage years, and stared at the ceiling. Down the hall, I could hear Mom crying softly in her room. The sound was muffled but unmistakable, a low keening that went on and on. I got up and padded down the hallway, meaning to check on her. But as I got closer to her door, I heard her say something that stopped me cold. "I'm sorry," she was whispering. "Tom, I'm so sorry." I should have told her. I should have told them both. My hand froze on the doorknob. Told us what? I stood there in the dark hallway, my heart pounding, wanting to knock, wanting to demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe I wasn't ready for whatever truth was behind that door. Maybe I was afraid that once I knew, I couldn't unknow it. I went back to my room and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The funeral was on a Monday, gray and drizzly, because of course it was. The whole town showed up. That's how small towns work, everyone comes to pay respects, whether they knew you well or barely at all. The funeral home was packed with people I'd grown up around, people who'd watched me go from pigtails to graduation gown, people who probably had opinions about why I'd left and never really come back. I sat in the front row between Mom and David, wearing a black dress I'd bought the day before and shoes that were already giving me blisters. The closed casket sat at the front of the room, covered in flowers, and I kept thinking, Dad's in there. That's my father in that box. But it didn't feel real. Pastor Mike gave a nice eulogy. He talked about Dad's dedication to the hardware store, his love for classic cars, his 43 years of marriage to Mom. He made Dad sound like a simple man with simple pleasures, which I guess wasn't wrong, but it also wasn't the whole truth. Nobody mentioned the distance. Nobody mentioned the silence. Nobody mentioned the sadness that had hung over our family like fog for the past several years. People came up to us afterward, shaking our hands, hugging Mom, saying things like he was a good man and he's in a better place now and let me know if you need anything. The usual funeral platitudes that mean well but don't mean much. I was on autopilot, shaking hands, accepting condolences, being the strong daughter everyone expected me to be. But inside, I felt hollow. Empty. I couldn't cry. Everyone around me was crying, Mom, David, the neighbors, Dad's friends from the Rotary Club, but I couldn't. The tears just wouldn't come. It was like they were stuck somewhere deep inside, trapped behind a dam I couldn't break. And I felt guilty about that. What kind of daughter doesn't cry at her father's funeral? But maybe I'd used up all my tears years ago. Maybe I'd cried them all out during those teenage years when I'd realized my father would never really see me, never really know me. Maybe grief doesn't always look like tears. Maybe sometimes it looks like numbness. After the service, we gathered at the house for the reception. More people, more casseroles, more empty words. I moved through the crowd, playing hostess, making sure there was enough coffee, directing people to the bathroom, doing anything to avoid standing still and thinking. David found me in the kitchen around 3 o'clock. "You holding up okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "You?" He shrugged. "I don't know, Lena." I keep expecting him to walk through the door and tell us all to stop making a fuss. I managed a small smile. "That sounds like Dad." "Yeah." David leaned against the counter. "Listen," the lawyer called. Dad's lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He wants to do the will reading tomorrow. Tomorrow? That's fast. I guess Dad was specific about wanting it done right away. David looked uncomfortable. He's coming by at 10 a.m. Okay. I glanced out at the living room, where Mom was sitting in Dad's recliner, surrounded by well-meaning neighbors. She looked lost. Does Mom know? I told her. She just nodded. We stood there in silence for a moment, two siblings who should have been closer but had somehow drifted apart over the years. David, I started, then stopped. What? Never mind. I'll see you tomorrow. What I'd wanted to ask was, did you ever feel like you didn't really know him? Did you ever wonder what was going on behind his eyes? Did you ever hear Mom crying late at night and wonder what secrets our parents were keeping? But I didn't ask. Some questions are too big for a kitchen conversation at a funeral reception. The last mourners left around 7 p.m. Mom went straight to bed without eating dinner. David and I cleaned up in silence, packing away casseroles in Tupperware, washing dishes, taking out garbage bags full of paper plates and plastic cups. I'm staying at the Comfort Inn, David said as he dried the last dish. You staying here? Yeah, I think Mom needs someone around. He nodded. Okay. I'll see you in the morning for the lawyer thing. After he left, I did a final walkthrough of the house, turning off lights, making sure everything was locked up. The house was so quiet now, after all the noise and people. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Mom's white noise machine from her bedroom. I ended up back in the living room, standing in front of Dad's recliner. It still had the indent of his body in the cushions, still smelled faintly of his Old Spice cologne and the Skoal tobacco he'd chewed despite Mom's protests. His reading glasses were on the side table next to a John Grisham novel with a bookmark halfway through. I picked up the book and looked at the bookmark. It was one of those free ones you get at the library, advertising the summer reading program from 3 years ago. He'd never finish this book now. That thought hit me harder than anything else had all day. It was such a small thing, an unfinished novel, but it felt enormous. All the things Dad would never finish. All the conversations we'd never have. All the questions I'd never get to ask. I sat down in his chair, hugging the book to my chest, and finally, the tears came. I cried for the father I'd had and the father I'd wanted. I cried for all the distance between us, all the words left unsaid. I cried because he was gone and I'd never get another chance to bridge that gap, to understand him, to be understood by him. I cried until I had nothing left. The next morning, Mr. Henderson arrived exactly at 10 a.m. Gerald Henderson had been Dad's lawyer for as long as I could remember. He was a neat, precise man in his 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars. He'd handled all of Dad's business stuff, the hardware store paperwork, the property deeds, whatever legal things a small-town businessman needs. We gathered in the dining room, Mom, David, Mr. Henderson, and me. Mom had dressed carefully for this, back in her usual uniform of slacks and a cardigan, hair combed, makeup on. But her hands shook as she folded them on the table. Mr. Henderson opened his briefcase with a soft click. First, let me say again how sorry I am for your loss, he began, his voice gentle. Thomas was a good man and a good client. He came to see me about 6 months ago to update his will. 6 months ago? That seemed recent. I glanced at David, but he looked as surprised as I felt. The estate is fairly straightforward, Mr. Henderson continued, pulling out papers. The house and all assets go to Eileen, of course. The hardware store is to be sold, with the proceeds divided equally between the three of you. His savings and investments, after funeral expenses, also to be divided equally. He went through the details methodically. It was all very standard, very expected. Dad hadn't been wealthy, but he'd been comfortable. The hardware store was worth something, even in a small town. We'd each walk away with enough to make a difference, if not to change our lives. But something felt off. Mr. Henderson kept pausing, glancing at a separate envelope he'd set aside. His usual professional composure seemed slightly rattled. Finally, David asked what we were all thinking. Is there something else? Mr. Henderson looked at Mom. She'd gone very still, staring at the envelope. Thomas left, specific instructions, Mr. Henderson said carefully. He asked me to read this aloud to all of you, immediately following the distribution details. What is it? I asked. I'm not entirely sure. He sealed it himself and asked that I not read it beforehand. He just said. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. He said it was important. The most important thing. The room went absolutely silent. Mr. Henderson picked up the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. He opened it carefully, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and cleared his throat. This is Thomas's handwriting, he confirmed, looking at us. There's just one sentence. One sentence? My father's entire will, his final words to his family, and he'd left one sentence? Mr. Henderson read. The truth always hurts, but sometimes forgiveness is worth more than the pain itself. The words hung in the air. I felt them land like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. Mom made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. David said, What? What does that mean? But I was watching Mom. The color had drained from her face. Her hands were trembling openly now. Mrs. Carter? Mr. Henderson looked concerned. Do you need some water? Mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me. She walked out of the room with quick, jerky steps. A moment later, we heard her bedroom door close. I don't understand, David said, looking from Mr. Henderson to me. That's it? That's all he left us? Some cryptic message about forgiveness? Mr. Henderson looked deeply uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I don't know any more than you do. Thomas was very private. He said you would understand when the time was right. But we didn't understand. Not at all. Did he leave any other instructions? I asked. Any letters? Anything else? No. Just this. Mr. Henderson tapped the paper. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. After Mr. Henderson left, David and I sat at the dining table, staring at that single sentence. The truth always hurts, but sometimes forgiveness is worth more than the pain itself, David read aloud. What truth? Forgiveness for what? This doesn't make any sense, Lena. But it did, in a terrible way. Because I'd heard Mom crying. I'd heard her say she should have told us something. And now Dad, from beyond the grave, was talking about truth and forgiveness. What had happened in this family? What had my parents been hiding? I'm going to talk to Mom, I said, standing up. Good luck with that, David muttered. She's been shutting us out for years. He wasn't wrong. But maybe now that Dad was gone, maybe she'd finally tell us the truth. I knocked on Mom's bedroom door. Mom? Can we talk? Silence. Mom, please. I need to understand what Dad meant. More silence, then finally, not now, Lena. When? Mom, you can't just. I said not now. Her voice cracked. Please. Just, give me some time. I stood outside her door, frustration and worry battling inside me. But what could I do? Break the door down? Force her to talk? I went to find David instead. He was in the living room, pacing. She won't talk to me, I said. Surprise, surprise. He ran his hands through his hair. This is crazy, Lena. Dad leaves us some mysterious message about forgiveness. Mom won't explain anything. What are we supposed to do? I don't know. Did you notice anything weird before Dad died? When you visited, did he say anything strange? I thought back to my last visit in July. Dad had been in the garage, as usual. I'd barely seen him except at dinner one night, where he'd been quiet, picking at his food while Mom chattered nervously about her garden club and the new restaurant opening downtown. He'd looked tired. Old. Like something was weighing on him. But he hadn't said anything unusual. Nothing that hinted at some big secret. No, I told David. Nothing I can remember. You? Same. Every time I called, Mom would answer. She'd make excuses for why Dad couldn't come to the phone. I just thought. He trailed off. You thought what? I thought maybe they were getting divorced. The way they acted around each other, the separate rooms, the silence. I thought maybe that's what was coming. I'd thought the same thing, actually. But divorce after 43 years? That seemed more dramatic than Mom and Dad's style. They'd always been the type to suffer in silence, to keep up appearances. We need to find out what this is about, I said. There has to be something in this house. Some clue. David looked at me. You want to go through Dad's stuff? Don't you? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. I do. Because this not knowing, it's driving me crazy. We started in Dad's workshop. It was a cluttered space attached to the garage, filled with tools and car parts and mysterious mechanical things I'd never understood. Dad had spent hours out here, tinkering, fixing, building. It had been his sanctuary, the one place Mom never entered. David and I stood in the doorway, both of us hesitant to step inside. It felt like violating something sacred. Where do we even start? David asked. I don't know. Look for papers, I guess. Letters, documents, anything written. We searched methodically. David took the workbench and tool chest, I took the filing cabinet and shelves. Most of what we found was predictable: instruction manuals, receipts for parts, sketches of car repairs, old copies of Popular Mechanics. Nothing personal. Nothing revealing. After an hour, we'd found exactly nothing. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place, David said, frustrated. Maybe there's nothing to find, I countered. Maybe that message was just Dad being Dad. Cryptic and unhelpful even in death. But I didn't believe that. The look on Mom's face when she'd heard those words, that was the look of someone who knew exactly what they meant. And it scared her. We moved to Dad's home office next. It was really just a corner of the guest bedroom with a desk and another filing cabinet. More business papers, tax returns, boring adult stuff. Then I found something. It was in the bottom drawer of the desk, pushed all the way to the back, a small wooden box, maybe 8 inches square, dark cherry wood with a brass latch. David, look at this. He came over as I set the box on the desk. It was heavier than I expected, something solid shifting inside. And on the top, in Dad's handwriting, were 4 words. Don't open unless ready. My hands started shaking. Jesus, David breathed. That's ominous. Should we open it? Are you kidding? After everything that's happened? Hell yes, we should open it. But I hesitated. Something about those words, unless ready, sent a chill through me. Ready for what? What could be in this box that required preparation? Lena. David's voice was gentle. We need to know. He was right. Whatever secrets our parents had been keeping, they'd already broken something in this family. We deserved to know the truth. I unlatched the box and lifted the lid. Inside was a photograph, a letter, and an old, yellowed envelope. David picked up the photograph first. It showed a younger version of Dad, maybe late 20s, early 30s, standing with a woman I didn't recognize. She was pretty, with long dark hair and a bright smile. And between them, holding both their hands, was a little girl who looked about 5 or 6 years old. The little girl had Dad's eyes. His stubborn chin. She looked like me. Who is this? David's voice had gone very quiet. I picked up the letter with trembling hands. The paper was worn, like it had been read and reread many times. It was dated 25 years ago. Dear Lena. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and so much has changed. I don't know how much your mother has told you, maybe everything, maybe nothing. Knowing Eileen, probably nothing. She's tried so hard to protect you from the truth, to keep our family intact. I let her. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. There was a time before you were born when I loved someone else. Her name was Sarah Bennett. We met when I was 28, just starting out with the hardware store. She was working at the diner, putting herself through community college. We fell hard and fast, the way young people do when they don't know better. We were together for 3 years. And then she got pregnant. I was young and scared and stupid. I thought I wasn't ready for that responsibility. I thought there was still time to figure out my life before settling down. So I left. I left her alone with that baby, a daughter named Grace, and I never looked back. 6 months later, I met your mother. Eileen was everything Sarah wasn't: stable, from a good family, accepted by everyone in town. We got married within a year. You came along 2 years after that. I tried to forget about Sarah and Grace. I told myself it was in the past, that I'd made my choice and had to live with it. But I saw them sometimes, around town. Watched Grace grow up from a distance. And every time I looked at you, Lena, I saw her. You two looked so much alike it was uncanny. Same eyes, same expressions. Your mother found out about them 5 years into our marriage. She'd heard rumors, probably, but I finally told her the truth. She was devastated, furious, hurt beyond words. But she decided to forgive me, on one condition: we never spoke about it. We never acknowledged Grace. We kept our family intact and pretended my past didn't exist. I agreed. God forgive me, I agreed to that deal. So Sarah and Grace faded into the background of our lives. I'd see them at the grocery store or the gas station, and we'd nod politely like strangers. I sent money sometimes, anonymously, just to ease my conscience. But I was never a father to Grace. I made that choice every single day. As the years passed, the weight of that choice got heavier. Your mother and I stopped talking about anything real. We became roommates, going through the motions. The silence between us grew until it filled up every room in this house. I wanted to tell you so many times. When you graduated high school, when you left for college, when you got married, when you had Emily. Every major moment of your life, I thought, she deserves to know. She has a sister. But I was a coward. I couldn't face your disappointment, couldn't bear to see how you'd look at me once you knew what I'd done. So I'm telling you now, when I can't see your face, can't hear your voice breaking, can't watch you pull away from me. Grace lives in Riverside, about 30 miles south of here. Last I heard, she was a nurse at the hospital there. She got married a few years ago to someone named Michael. I don't know much else. I wrote her letters over the years, dozens of them, but I never sent them. They're in an envelope in this box. Maybe she'd want to read them. Maybe not. I don't know if she even knows who I am, if Sarah ever told her about me. The truth always hurts, Lena. And I know this truth is going to hurt you. It's going to hurt David. It's going to hurt your mother all over again. But I've learned something in my last years on this earth. Sometimes forgiveness is worth more than the pain itself. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But maybe, you can forgive yourself for whatever anger or confusion you feel. Maybe you can forgive your mother for keeping this secret. And maybe, if you're brave enough, you can reach out to Grace. You have a sister, Lena. And she never asked for any of this either. I'm sorry doesn't cover it. It doesn't even come close. But I am. I'm so deeply sorry for the pain I've caused and the pain that's still to come. I love you. I always have, even when I was too broken to show it right. Dad. The letter slipped from my hands and floated to the floor. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room was spinning. I have a sister. My father had a whole other child. A daughter he abandoned. A daughter who looks like me. Lena. David's voice seemed to come from very far away. Lena, sit down. You're white as a sheet. He guided me to the bed. I sat down hard, my legs giving out. Did you read it? I managed to ask. Yeah. He picked up the letter, reading it again. Holy shit, Lena. This is. I don't even know what this is. Mom knew. The words came out flat, hollow. She's known this whole time. For our entire lives. All those years she acted like everything was fine. Sunday dinners, Christmas cards, the perfect family photos. David's voice was rising. And she was keeping this massive secret the whole time? I picked up the envelope from the box. It was thick, stuffed with papers. I pulled out the letters, dozens of them, like Dad had said. All addressed to Grace, all unsent. I opened one at random, dated 8 years ago. Dear Grace. You turned 25 this week. I saw your mother at the post office. She looks well. I didn't ask about you, but I wanted to. I always want to. I wonder if you know I exist. I wonder if you hate me, or if you've just never thought about me at all. Both options hurt. I saw Lena today too. She came home for Thanksgiving. She's so much like you, or at least like what I imagine you're like. Strong, smart, determined to make her own way in the world. Sometimes I think about what it would be like if you two met. Would you get along? Would you look at each other and see the same stubborn streak, the same dark sense of humor? I'll never know. That's my punishment, I suppose. I couldn't read anymore. I stuffed the letters back in the envelope and set it aside. There's a photograph too, David said quietly. He was holding the picture we'd seen first. This must be Grace. And the woman is Sarah Bennett, I finished. Her mother. We sat there in silence, trying to process it all. My father had lived 2 lives. One with us, his legitimate family, playing the role of devoted husband and father. And one in his head, filled with guilt and regret and a daughter he'd thrown away. And Mom. God, what must this have done to Mom? We need to talk to her, I said. Now. No more waiting. David nodded. Okay. But Lena, what if she won't tell us the rest? The letter explains why Dad was distant, but it doesn't explain everything. What else are they hiding? I don't know. But we're going to find out. Mom was in the kitchen, standing at the sink, staring out the window at nothing. She didn't turn when we came in. Maybe she'd heard us opening the box, reading the letter. Maybe she'd been waiting for this moment. Mom. My voice came out harder than I intended. We need to talk. I know. You know? David's voice was sharp. You know? Mom, we just found out we have a sister. A sister you and Dad hid from us our entire lives. And all you can say is I know? David and Mom's voice broke. She gripped the edge of the sink like it was the only thing holding her up. Please. I can explain. Then explain, I said. No more secrets. No more silence. Tell us everything. Mom finally turned to face us. She looked older than she had just days ago, like the weight of this secret had aged her decades in a moment. She sat down at the kitchen table, and we joined her. For a long moment, she just looked at her hands, gathering the words. Then she started talking. I met your father when I was 24, she began. He was 30, just starting to make a name for himself with the hardware store. Everyone in town liked Tom Carter. He was charming, hardworking, the kind of man you could build a life with. She paused, collecting herself. We dated for 6 months before he proposed. Everything moved fast back then. You met someone, you got married, you started a family. That was just how it worked. But he didn't tell you about Sarah, I said. No. Not until after we were married. Mom's hands clenched. We'd been married 5 years. You were 3, Lena. David was just a baby. And I found a letter. A letter from Sarah? Mom nodded. She'd written to your father, asking for help. Grace was 7 and needed medical care, nothing serious, just tonsils out, but Sarah couldn't afford it on her own. She wasn't asking him to be a father. She was just asking for help paying the hospital bill. Mom's voice got quieter. I found the letter in Tom's jacket pocket when I was doing laundry. And when I confronted him, he told me everything. About Sarah, about Grace, about how he'd walked away from them. What did you do? David asked. I should have left him. Mom laughed bitterly. That's what a strong woman would have done, right? Pack up the kids and go. But I was 29 years old with 2 babies and no college degree. My parents were dead. I had nowhere to go, no way to support myself. And Tom, he was crying, begging me to forgive him, swearing he'd never see Sarah again. So you stayed, I said. I stayed. But I made him promise me on everything holy, that Sarah and Grace would never be part of our lives. That we'd never speak their names in this house. That he'd never acknowledge that child. The way she said that child, with such cold distance, made me flinch. Mom, she was just a kid. I know. Mom's voice cracked. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent the last 35 years feeling guilty about it? But I was protecting my family, Lena. I was protecting you and David from the scandal, from the whispers, from having your father torn between two families. You were protecting yourself, David said quietly. Mom's face crumpled. Yes. Okay, yes. I was protecting myself too. I was humiliated, David. The whole town had seen Tom with Sarah. They'd watched their relationship. And then he married me so quickly afterward, everyone knew. Everyone was talking about how Tom Carter traded down, how he picked the safe choice. She wiped her eyes roughly. I couldn't bear the thought of Grace coming into our lives and being a constant reminder of that humiliation. So I buried it. We both did. We built this perfect little life on top of that secret and pretended it didn't exist. But it did exist, I said. It was always there, wasn't it? That's why you and Dad stopped talking. That's why he spent all his time in the garage. That's why this house has felt dead for years. Mom nodded miserably. About 5 years ago, Tom started talking about wanting to reach out to Grace. He'd heard she was getting married, and it ate at him that he wouldn't be there. We had the biggest fight we'd ever had. I told him if he contacted her, I'd leave. I'd take everything and leave him with nothing. Jesus, Mom, David breathed. So he didn't reach out. But something broke between us that day. We stopped pretending everything was okay. We just existed in the same house, two strangers counting down the days. Did he keep tabs on her? I asked. On Grace? I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Mom looked at me with red, swollen eyes. But I think he did. I think he followed her life from a distance, watched her grow up in whatever ways he could without actually being in her life. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about Dad in his workshop, alone with his guilt and his regrets. Writing letters he'd never send to a daughter he'd never know. And Mom in the house, standing guard over her secret, making sure the facade never cracked. What a sad, lonely way to live. Why didn't you tell us? I finally asked. When we were older, when we could understand, why keep lying? Because once you tell a lie that big, you can never untell it, Mom said. Every day I didn't say something made it harder to say it the next day. And then years passed, and you both moved away, and I thought, maybe you'd never have to know. Maybe this secret could die with me and Tom. But Dad didn't want it to die with him, David said. That's what the will was about. He wanted us to know. Mom nodded. He told me 6 months ago that he was going to leave something in his will. I begged him not to. We fought about it constantly. But he said he was dying, his heart, the doctor said it wasn't good, and he couldn't go to his grave without telling the truth. So he left us that cryptic message about forgiveness, I said. He thought if he just told you outright, you'd never speak to us again. But if he made you curious enough to search, if you found his letter yourself. Mom trailed off. He thought maybe you'd understand better that way. It was twisted logic, but in a weird way, I understood it. Dad had always been indirect, always communicated through actions rather than words. Even in death, he couldn't just say what he meant. He had to make us work for it. Does Grace know? I asked. Does she know who her father was? I don't know, Mom said. Sarah never came to us asking for anything except that one time with the medical bills. Tom sent her money anonymously over the years. I didn't stop him from doing that, but he never signed his name. Whether Sarah told Grace about him, I have no idea. I pulled the envelope of letters from my pocket and set them on the table. Dad wrote to her. Dozens of letters. He never sent them. Mom looked at the envelope like it was a snake. I didn't know he did that. He wrote about us, I said. About me. He told Grace that we looked alike, that he wondered if we'd get along. Something flickered across Mom's face, his pain, guilt, maybe fear. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. The question hung there. What was I going to do? I had a sister I'd never met. A half-sister who'd grown up 30 miles away, who might not even know I existed. A woman who'd been abandoned by our father just like I'd been, different abandonments, but both left scars. I don't know, I admitted. Lena, please. Mom reached across the table, grabbing my hand. Please don't. Just, let it be. Don't go looking for her. You'll only stir up pain for everyone. She deserves to know, David said. If she doesn't already know who Dad was, she deserves to know. Why? Mom's voice rose. Why does she deserve anything from us? We don't owe her. She's our sister. I snapped. Mom, she's our sister. That means something. She's a stranger. Because you and Dad made sure of it. We stared at each other across the table, decades of resentment and hurt suddenly out in the open. I'm going to find her, I said finally. I'm going to find Grace and tell her who I am. Who we are. And what if she doesn't want to know? Mom asked. What if you show up and she slams the door in your face? What if you're opening wounds that have finally healed? Then at least I tried, I said. At least I'll know I didn't make the same mistake you and Dad made. I won't pretend she doesn't exist. Mom looked at me with something like fear. You're going to hate me for this. Both of you. You're going to hate me for the choices I made. I don't hate you, Mom, I said, and I meant it. I'm angry and hurt and confused. But I don't hate you. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. But that doesn't make it right. What about me? David asked. Do I get a say in this? We both looked at him. I think. He took a breath. I think Lena's right. I want to meet Grace. I want to know our sister. Maybe she'll want nothing to do with us, and that's her right. But we should at least try. Mom put her head in her hands and wept. We sat with her, not knowing what else to do. This family had been built on secrets and silence, and now all of that was crumbling. It hurt, God, it hurt, but maybe pain was the price of truth. Maybe that's what Dad had meant. The truth always hurts, but sometimes forgiveness is worth more than the pain itself. I spent that night in my old room, unable to sleep. Grace Bennett. I kept turning the name over in my mind, trying to make it feel real. I had a sister. A woman who was my age. Dad's letter had mentioned she was born 3 years before me, which would make her 36 now. What was she like? Did she have Dad's stubbornness? His quiet intensity? Or was she like Sarah, whoever Sarah was? I picked up my phone a dozen times, thinking about searching for her online. Grace Bennett, Riverside, Oregon. How hard could it be? But something stopped me each time. This felt too big, too important to do through social media. If I was going to meet my sister, I wanted to do it right. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. David was in the kitchen, sitting in the dark with a beer. Can't sleep either? I asked. Nope. He gestured to the fridge. There's more beer if you want. I grabbed one and sat across from him. I've been thinking, David said. About what Mom said. About how we might be opening old wounds. And I think she's probably right. But I also think, we can't unknow this, Lena. We can't just pretend we didn't find that box. So we have two choices: spend the rest of our lives wondering about Grace, or actually do something about it. When did you get so wise? He smiled faintly. I've been in therapy for 2 years. Turns out it actually helps. Really? Yeah. After Jennifer and I broke up, the girlfriend before the current one, I kind of fell apart. Started seeing someone to talk through it. And one thing I've learned is that secrets are poison. They rot everything from the inside out. I thought about our family, about the way that secret had rotted Mom and Dad's marriage, had created distance between all of us. You're right, I said. We can't just pretend. So what's the plan? Do we just show up at her house? Call her? What's the etiquette for meeting a secret half-sister? I have no idea. I took a sip of beer. I was thinking maybe we try to find out if she knows first. If Sarah told her about Dad. How do we do that? I don't know. Research? Maybe look her up online, see if we can find anything? David pulled out his phone. Grace Bennett, Riverside, Oregon. Let's see what Google says. He typed for a moment, then went still. What? Did you find her? Yeah. He turned the phone toward me. I found her. It was a Facebook profile, set to public. The profile picture showed a woman with long dark hair and a warm smile, wearing scrubs. Behind her was a hospital hallway. She looked exactly like me. Not sort of like me. Not vaguely like me. She looked like she could be my twin. Same dark eyes, same nose, same stubborn chin. Even her smile was familiar, it was the smile I saw in the mirror every day. Jesus, I breathed. Yeah, David said quietly. That's definitely our sister. I scrolled through her photos with shaking hands. There she was at what looked like a wedding, her wedding, probably. A nice-looking guy in a suit, both of them laughing. There she was with friends at a birthday party. There she was holding a baby, the caption said, "My beautiful niece Emma." She had a life. A whole, complete life that had nothing to do with us. Look at this, David said, pointing to one of her posts from a few months ago. It was a photo of an older woman, Sarah, presumably, with the caption, "Happy birthday to the strongest woman I know. Thanks for always being there, Mom. Just us against the world, like always. Just us against the world." The words hit me like a punch. That's what they'd been, Sarah and Grace, a team of two, surviving without the man who should have been there. And here I'd grown up with a father, even if he was distant, even if he was broken. Grace had grown up with nothing but absence. She doesn't know, I said. What? She doesn't know about Dad. Look at her posts, she never mentions a father. It's always just her mom. If she knew Dad existed, if she knew about us, don't you think she'd have tried to reach out? Or at least mentioned it somewhere? David scrolled through more posts. You might be right. There's nothing here about a father, biological or otherwise. So Sarah never told her. Or Sarah told her he was dead. Or gone. Or something else that made it a closed chapter. We sat there looking at Grace's life through a screen, this stranger who was our blood. We should write her a message, I said. Through Facebook. It's less invasive than showing up at her door. What do we say? Hi, you don't know us, but surprise, we're your half-siblings? I don't know. But we have to say something. David handed me his phone. You do it. You're better with words than I am. I stared at the message box, cursor blinking. What do you say to the sister you never knew you had? Finally, I started typing. Dear Grace. You don't know me, but my name is Lena Carter. I'm writing to you about something very difficult and potentially painful, so please know that I'm not doing this lightly. I recently learned that we share a father, Thomas Carter. He passed away a week ago, and in going through his belongings, my brother David and I discovered that we have a half-sister we never knew about. You. I don't know if you were aware of him or if this comes as a complete shock. Either way, I'm so sorry for the pain this might cause. But I wanted you to know that you have family, if you want it. David and I would like to meet you, if you're willing. No pressure, no expectations. Just the truth, finally. My number is below if you'd prefer to call or text. I understand if you don't want any contact. But I hope you do. Lena. I read it over 3 times, then looked at David. Should I send it? He took a breath. Yeah. Send it. My finger hovered over the button. Once I sent this, there was no taking it back. Grace's life would be changed forever, just like ours had been. But she deserved the truth. I pressed send. For 2 days, nothing happened. David stayed in town, both of us too anxious to leave. We avoided talking about it directly, but it was all we could think about. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Mom stayed in her room mostly, only coming out for meals. The silence in the house was oppressive, weighted with anticipation. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. Unknown number, Riverside area code. I answered with shaking hands. Hello? Is this Lena? The voice was female, cautious. Yes. Is this Grace? Yeah. A pause. I got your message. I've been staring at it for 3 days trying to figure out what to say. I'm sorry. I know this must be. Is it true? She cut me off. About Thomas Carter? He was really my father? Yes. I have letters he wrote to you. Dozens of them. He never sent them, but, yes, it's true. I heard her take a shaky breath. I didn't know. My mom never, she told me my father was just some guy who left before I was born. She never told me his name or anything about him. I always thought he just didn't care.